Noah stood out. Not only did he build a gigantic ark, but he also ensured the continuation of life on earth. Defying all those who doubted and ridiculed him, he followed divine instructions that seemed absurd and, against all odds, found favor in the eyes of the Creator. But how could a mere man prepare for the end of the known world? And even more intriguing, what did he know that everyone else ignored? Stay with us, because the answers go beyond faith and into the realm of the extraordinary. At the beginning of the biblical accounts, especially in the book of Genesis, we discover a world quite distinct from our own, a universe before the Great Flood. This era is often surrounded by multiple layers of interpretations and represents a period of primitive humanity, characterized by extraordinary longevities, direct interactions between deities and humans, and a closer coexistence with God. Through figures such as Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, and later Noah, we are introduced to glimpses of an existence that, although remote, appears somewhat familiar. Numerous forces converge to trigger the flood, with the actions of Satan and the fallen angels standing out among them. The first significant event that preceded the flood occurred even before the creation of the world. This crucial moment is described in the biblical narrative of the book of Job, where God mentions an event prior to the formation of the world. In chapter 38, verses 4 to 7, the passage questions, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare, if you have such knowledge. Who determined its dimensions, or stretched the measuring line across it? On what were its foundations set, or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God, the angels, shouted for joy." This revelation suggests that angelic beings, referred to as morning stars and sons of God, witnessed the creation of the earth and celebrated the power, glory, and wisdom of the divine. This passage not only highlights the magnitude of the creative event, but also emphasizes the intimate connection between the cosmos and the divine, a theme that resonates throughout the scriptures and shapes the biblical understanding of the universe and humanity before the cataclysm of the flood. Before the flood, among the beings involved was a distinct group, the fallen angels. The Bible only makes sporadic references to these angels because most angels in heaven never strayed or turned to evil. However, some chose to abandon their path. It is important to understand that heaven was originally meant to be the eternal home of these beings. But by their own choices, they fell. This episode underlines the fact that angels possess free will, and their fall is a testimony to that autonomy. The book of Jude in the Bible delves deeply into this issue, as expressed in Jude verses 5 to 6 in the Amplified Bible. I want to remind you, although you already know this very well, that the Lord, after saving a people out of Egypt, subsequently destroyed those who did not believe. And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their own dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under darkness, for the judgment of the great day. This passage highlights how the free will of the angels led some to make decisions that resulted in their fall and subsequent punishment. They chose to abandon the place that was assigned to them, defying the established order, which resulted in eternal consequences. This account makes us reflect on themes such as responsibility, choice, and the ramifications of our actions, both on the celestial and human planes. In the book of Jude, it is mentioned that the angels did not keep their own domain, an expression that can be interpreted as their authority or original position. Angels were created specifically to dwell in heaven alongside God, praising Him and fulfilling His commands. They existed to glorify God, just like humans, although the latter were designed to live on earth. Despite their heavenly mission, these angels abandoned their initial post, that is, their original location in heaven. Satan, often depicted as an angel of light to illustrate his deceptive power, led these angels. This revolt, known as the Great Rebellion, was a critical event in which Satan and a group of angels from heaven attempted to usurp God's authority in the heavenly realm. Satan planned to overthrow his creator, but he and the angels who followed him were defeated. This historic confrontation is corroborated by Jesus himself, who was present and spoke of the glory and majesty he shared with God the Father even before the creation of the world. Reflecting on these events, Jesus provides a unique perspective on the eternal nature of God and the reality of celestial conflicts. He highlights the constant divine presence in governing the universe and the transcendental events that shape both heaven and earth. This narrative not only emphasizes the sovereignty of God, but also illustrates the ongoing battle between good and evil, a central theme in the scriptures and the Christian understanding of the spiritual universe. In John 17:5 of the Amplified Bible, Jesus makes a powerful declaration. "And now, Father, glorify me together with yourself, with the glory and majesty that I had with you before the world existed." Before even the creation of the earth, God shared his majesty with his Son. Jesus also mentions the fall of Satan, describing it as lightning falling from heaven, an event that reinforces the powerful and spiritual nature of Satan, which goes far beyond the popular caricature of a red figure with horns and a trident. He is an ancient being with real malevolent influence, which he uses for destructive and selfish purposes. Paul, in his epistles, underlines that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against an organized spiritual hierarchy under Satan's command, whose strongholds are in heavenly places. This is a startling reality, but clearly evidenced in the Bible, marking the start of an intense spiritual war, a confrontation between two distinct realms: the kingdom of God, governed by the Prince of Peace, and the kingdom of Satan, led by the Prince of Darkness. After their expulsion from heaven, Satan and his followers formed their own kingdom, committing themselves to challenge divine authority. The first attack of this kingdom against God occurred in the Garden of Eden, marking the beginning of a long history of confrontations and rebellions against the Creator. This biblical narrative not only highlights the continuous battle between good and evil, but also the importance of spiritual vigilance in recognizing and resisting the forces of evil that continue to be active and influential in the world. On Earth, Satan considered this planet as his own domain and saw Adam and Eve as invaders sent by God to his territory. God created humanity with the purpose of establishing his kingdom on earth, and this required Satan to devise a plan of attack. Initially, when God formed the world, he created a place called Eden, which in Hebrew means joy or delight, a location of provision where man could meet with God, as described in Genesis 3:8. At the center of this perfect garden was a special tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God instructed Adam and Eve to eat freely from any tree in the garden except for this one. Satan's mission was to subvert the destiny of humanity, and he employed cunning tactics for this purpose. His first approach was to sow doubt. In Genesis 3:1, he questions Eve. Did God really say? This insinuation by the father of lies was clearly an effort to confuse and destabilize Eve. The deceiver continued with his second strategy, the assumption. He suggested that perhaps the consequences of disobedience were not as severe as God had stated, questioning whether disobedience would indeed result in death. These manipulations aimed to lead Eve to question not only the instructions, but also the sincerity and authority of God. Satan used temptation as his third and final tactic against Eve, culminating in her disobedience and that of Adam. As a result of this act, they could no longer remain in the Garden of Eden, as God's disappointment manifested. However, even in the face of the error committed in eating the forbidden fruit, God did not abandon humanity. He established a promise of redemption in Eden, declaring that the seed of the woman would strike the serpent's head, a sign of future victory over the tempter. Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden, but God continued to bless them. They had 2 sons, Cain and Abel. Both grew up knowing God and learned about the importance of offerings. When the time came to worship, God accepted Abel's offering, but not Cain's, which provoked Cain's anger. Despite divine warning to master sin, Cain succumbed to anger, deceived his brother, murdered him, buried him, and denied the occurrence. This tragic episode not only marked the first murder recorded in the Bible, but also exemplified the profound consequences of sin, which began with disobedience in Eden and perpetuated in the human lineage through acts of violence and separation from God. After Abel's murder, Cain expressed his fear of retaliation, questioning whether he would be responsible for his brother's safety, to which God responded by placing a mark on Cain. This mark served as a warning. Anyone who killed Cain would suffer vengeance 7-fold, as described in Genesis 4:15. This showed God's mercy even in the face of such an atrocious act, protecting Cain from death, although he was condemned to a life of wandering, becoming a restless vagrant far from his home and family. Cain settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden, where he founded a city and named it Enoch, in honor of his son. His lineage included notable figures of his time, such as Jabal, considered the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock; Jubal, the father of all who play stringed instruments and flutes; and Tubal-Cain, who forged tools of bronze and iron, as reported in Genesis 4:17-22. The narrative of Cain unfolds into a story of 2 distinct families, a recurring theme in Genesis. Unfortunately, Cain's violent tendencies were perpetuated through his lineage. An example of this is one of his distant descendants, who boasted of his own violence, indicating that evil continued to spread among generations. Furthermore, before the flood, the practice of polygamy in his lineage was observed, a distortion of God's original design, which was for one man and one woman to be united for life. This deviation from divine plans shows how social patterns and behaviors began to deteriorate, reflecting a growing rebellion against God's commandments and the ideals established for humanity. In contrast to Cain's descendants, who adopted the practice of having multiple wives, God provided Eve with a new beginning by giving her a son named Seth in place of Abel. Seth followed the example of his deceased brother Abel's humble worship, marking a renewal in commitment and devotion to the Lord. With the arrival of Seth, people began to call on the name of the Lord, resuming a form of worship that deeply contrasted with Cain's proud and selfish approach. The humble manner of worship, practiced by Abel and now by Seth, was a genuine expression of faith that cried out to God, while Cain's path led to selfishness and destruction. The book of Jude recalls these events, warning of the dangers of following the way of Cain, as well as the faults of Balaam for greed and the rebellion of Korah, emphasizing the consequences of disobedience and the pursuit of personal interests above communion with God. When God needed an obedient servant many years later, he chose Noah, who was a descendant of Seth. Noah exemplified the loyalty and faith that characterized his lineage, in contrast to Cain's problematic legacy. Despite Cain and his family being innovators and skilled in developing new ideas and methods, this lineage was also marked by conflicts and transgressions that worsened over time. This pattern became a symbol of the human condition, a continual struggle between our potential for great deeds and our capacity for great evil. As generations after Adam multiplied, the world not only became more populated, but also increasingly permeated by sin. People often acted cruelly towards each other, lying, stealing, and even committing murders, reflecting a growing departure from the divine paths taught at the beginning of creation. During this early period, men experienced extraordinary longevities, living hundreds of years, a reflection of a time when humanity still maintained an intimate connection with its origins, and the world seemed younger and revitalized. Adam and Eve continued to expand their family after Cain and Abel, contributing to the beginnings of civilization. According to the Bible, after the birth of Seth, Adam lived another 800 years, during which he had more sons and daughters, Genesis 5:4. As the descendants of Adam and Eve grew, they formed their own families, continuously expanding the population. Besides Cain and Abel, Seth, another son of Adam, had notable descendants such as Enoch, Methuselah, and eventually Noah. Adam, the first man, reached the remarkable age of 930 years, Genesis 5:5. His son Seth lived to 912 years, Genesis 5:8. And Enoch, Seth's son, lived 905 years, Genesis 5:11. As generations succeeded, each man passed down his knowledge to his children, teaching them how to cultivate the land, care for animals, and crucially, how to maintain a relationship with God. This lineage was particularly special as it carried the spiritual heritage of humanity's initial interaction with the divine, including the influence of the fallen angels. Despite their long lives and vast wisdom, these early peoples were not immune to the dilemmas and adversities that often challenged humanity, showing that wisdom and longevity did not protect them from the challenges and temptations of human existence. Enoch, mentioned in Genesis 5, stands out notably in the biblical genealogy. Unlike the Enoch who was the son of Cain, this Enoch at the age of 65 became the father of Methuselah, known for being the longest-lived man recorded in the scriptures. He is also the great-grandfather of Noah, a connection that underscores the significance of his lineage. The narrative of Enoch is peculiar and inspiring. He not only lived during a time when most people are remembered merely for their births and offspring, but also distinguished himself by his intimate relationship with God. Genesis 5:22 and 5:24 emphasize that Enoch walked with God, and unlike his contemporaries, he had a singular earthly end. God took him directly to heaven, without him experiencing common death. This brief description of his life, although succinct, is dense with meaning, and resonates deeply about the purity of his path alongside God, to the point of being translated directly to heaven, a rare and exceptional testimony. Enoch serves as a vital example of how living in constant communion with God, dedicated and faithful, can transcend even the natural course of life and death. Enoch's life inspires generations by teaching the value of living for an audience of one, focusing on a deep and personal relationship with God rather than seeking earthly approval. He reminds us of the possibility of an existence that goes beyond the material and ephemeral, directed towards the eternal and divine. Enoch teaches us, quietly, to seek passionate and intimate communion with God. Genesis 5:24 states that Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. This event marks the first recorded rapture, highlighting such intense communion that God enveloped him completely. The book of Hebrews also reminds us of figures like Enoch, describing men of whom the world was not worthy. Despite the beauty of Enoch's life, his era was not perfect. People lived long but not always well, which gave them time both to perfect skills and to make mistakes and stray from God. This led to a world corrupted and distant from its divine origins. As tribes and families formed and the population grew, the need for different roles and professions emerged, reflecting the diversification of society. For example, Cain was a farmer, while his brother Abel was a shepherd, showing that from early on, roles were being defined based on needs and abilities. Tubal-Cain, a descendant of Cain, stood out as an instructor of all craftsmen in bronze and iron, according to Genesis 4:22. This marks the emergence of more specialized professions like metallurgy. Another descendant, Jubal, is mentioned as the father of all who play the harp and flute, also indicating the development of musicians in that society. These specialized roles allowed society to become more complex and organized, setting the stage for more advanced forms of civilization. Despite this progress, life before the Great Flood was not ideal. Genesis 6:5 describes how the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. In summary, before the flood, humanity expanded and diversified. Families transformed into tribes, roles evolved into professions, and civilization took its first significant steps. However, this era also saw the incursion of the Nephilim, where, according to tradition, evil beings attempted to corrupt the human lineage, a plan attributed to Satan to pollute the lineage that would lead to the Messiah. In Genesis 6:1-2, we observe a critical moment in human history when mankind began to multiply on the earth and daughters were born to them. In this context, the sons of God, characterized in the book of Job as angels, noticed the beauty of the daughters of men and chose some of them as wives. This episode is one of the most enigmatic and discussed in the Bible, involving the interaction between celestial beings and humans. A third of these sons of God are traditionally described as fallen angels, who rebelled with Satan and were expelled from heaven. Feeling threatened by the growth and prosperity of God's kingdom, the Prince of Darkness, Satan, summoned these entities to corrupt humanity. They descended to earth, and from this union with human women were born the Nephilim, or giants, whose Hebrew name means fallen. This incursion not only brought powerful beings into the world like the Nephilim, but also a great moral and spiritual corruption. Verses 1-5 of chapter 6 detail how this wickedness spread widely, culminating in the divine decision that "My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years." The Nephilim are described as the mighty men who were of old, men of renown, indicating their exceptional influence and strength. However, their presence and the widespread corruption that followed marked a turning point, leading God to consider a drastic intervention, as the account of the flood suggests. This event reflects the ongoing battle between divine forces and evil forces for influence over humanity and the fate of the world. The scenario described in Genesis 6 reflects a time of deep moral and spiritual crisis in humanity. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. This verse not only underscores the prevalence of evil, but its constancy in the human heart, painting a picture of a society consumed by selfish desires, where actions are driven without consideration for the consequences to others. In this world, virtues such as honesty, integrity, and kindness were rare or even misunderstood. Deception and manipulation dominated, with each person acting out of self-interest, eroding the social fabric with greed and wickedness. Families, which should have been havens of love and support, turned into battlefields marked by deceit and betrayal. Neighbors did not care for each other, opting to exploit one another instead. Institutions of justice, instead of promoting equity, became systems of oppression that reinforced the dominance of the powerful over the weak. In this already chaotic and degraded setting, the Nephilim emerge, described as special beings, exceptionally strong and imposing, more than mere mortals. However, instead of being a force for good, their presence seems to exacerbate existing problems. They amplify the difficulties faced by society, contributing to an even darker era of conflict and corruption. The arrival of the Nephilim, therefore, is not seen as a sign of hope, but as an aggravation of an already dire situation of moral and spiritual decline. The Nephilim, with their impressive size and strength, not only influenced but also led many people away from God, becoming objects of admiration, fear, and even worship. Their presence and the power they wielded contributed to deepening the chaos and sin in a world already in steep spiritual and moral decline. The depth of human corruption brought immense sadness to God, for humanity, which was the jewel of his creation, had completely strayed from its original purposes. Instead of living in harmony with each other and with creation, people were immersed in violence, wickedness, and deceit. In Genesis 6:6, the New International Version describes that the Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. This is an expression of divine sadness, a feeling of pain so intense that it is difficult for human understanding to fully comprehend. Faced with this deep anguish, and as a reflection of his pain, God decides to intervene drastically. Genesis 6:7, in the Amplified Version, records the divine decision. So the Lord said, "I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them." This decision reveals not only divine justice in response to sin, but also God's sadness at the failure of his creation to fulfill the purpose for which they were created. Amid the chaos and increasing wickedness of humanity, God felt deep disturbance by the actions of the people he created, leading him to contemplate a drastic intervention to heal the world. However, even in this dark chapter of human history, a glimmer of hope emerged in the figure of Noah. As recorded in Genesis 6:8, Noah found favor and grace in the eyes of the Lord. Unlike the rest, Noah stood out as a beacon of hope, a man of integrity and faith. Genesis 6:9 describes Noah as a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked with God. Born into the lineage of Adam through Seth, Enoch, Canaan, among others, Noah inherited and perpetuated the commitment to righteousness through the generations. He not only carried the torch of righteousness, but allowed it to shine brightly in his life. As the head of a family, having 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah was also a loving father and a faithful husband, instilling in his children the virtues he himself valued. Even in the face of the painful divine decision to purify the earth through a devastating flood, Noah's faith did not waver. He understood the gravity of the mission entrusted to him and accepted it with a heavy but resolute heart. God declared in Genesis 6:13 that because of human violence, he would destroy both people and the earth. Noah was deemed worthy by God to be the guardian of a new beginning for humanity. Even facing scorn and disbelief from those around him, Noah devoted years to building the ark, warning about the imminent flood, and awaiting the moment when God would seal him, along with his family, inside the wooden refuge. When the rains finally arrived and the waters engulfed the earth, Noah's virtues became the cornerstone of a new world, highlighting his importance not only as a survivor, but as a moral and spiritual foundation for the rebuilding of humanity. Noah's fidelity and obedience not only ensured his survival, but also preserved his lineage, from which a nation would emerge in a purified land. In a world consumed by chaos, Noah's integrity stood out, serving as a beacon of light and a testament to the enduring power of virtue and faith amid overwhelming darkness. God's covenant with Noah is detailed in Genesis 6:17-22. The ark, described in these verses, functioned as a sanctuary for Noah's family, a vehicle designed to lift them above the devastating waters. God instructed Noah to build the ark with gopher wood, make compartments in it, and coat it inside and out with pitch to ensure it was waterproof. Genesis 6:14. God not only tasked Noah with building the ark, but also provided detailed specifications for its design. This was not an ordinary boat, but a special vessel designed to save the last living beings from a world under flood. The dimensions of the ark were immense, 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, which, converted to modern measurements, corresponds to approximately 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. The ark was also equipped with a door and a window and divided into different floors, providing separate spaces for the various types of life it would house. This monumental construction not only illustrates the scale of the impending destruction, but also the meticulousness of the divine plan for life preservation through the obedience of a righteous man. God gave clear instructions to Noah on how to build the ark, as per Genesis 6:15. Thus, Noah began the arduous task of raising the ark, despite many who ridiculed him and questioned his sanity. But Noah maintained his faith. Over the years, as the wood took shape, the monumental ark rose as an undeniable testament to Noah's obedience and fidelity. God also guided Noah on who and what to take onto the ark. His wife, his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives were to board. Additionally, God asked Noah to bring 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to preserve them. Noah was also instructed to bring 7 of each clean animal, a male and its mate, 2 of each unclean animal, male and its mate, and 7 of each bird of the air, male and its mate, to keep their species alive on the face of the earth. Genesis 7:2-3. Noah did everything exactly as God had commanded. Genesis 6:22. The flood was a transformative event, not only marking the end of an era, but signaling the start of a new one. The story of Noah and the ark is a powerful reminder of God's ability to renew and restore even in the face of the greatest adversities. Noah's unwavering faith and dedication to following God's will made him a symbol of hope and resilience, qualities that continue to inspire generations. The narrative of the flood, with its lessons of faith, obedience, and renewal, remains one of the most powerful and enduring stories in the Bible, highlighting humanity's capacity to reconnect with God, even in the most difficult moments. And that is the story of how the courage and obedience of one man saved humanity from total disaster. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with someone who needs a dose of hope and faith. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that defy expectations and remind us of the power of faith in the face of the impossible. See you next time.